Unmasking the GOP's voter suppression tactics in North Carolina. Here's a shocking reality that most Americans don't fully grasp. The blueprint for undermining voting rights in America has a name, and it's being perfected right before our eyes. When the Republican Party found itself scrambling to secure victory in North Carolina's pivotal 2014 Senate race, they turned to Thom Tillis as their standard-bearer. At that time, Tillis held the position of House Speaker in the state legislature, where he had presided over the passage of comprehensive legislation designed to restrict voting access. What makes this particularly troubling is that one of Tillis's senior advisors had specifically requested demographic breakdowns by race to ensure the legislation would disproportionately harm African American voters compared to their white counterparts. In a state where the African American electorate exceeds 1.5 million registered voters, Tillis managed to clinch that Senate seat by a razor-thin margin of under 50,000 votes. While federal courts eventually overturned the restrictive voting law, ruling that it deliberately targeted black voters with what judges described as almost surgical precision, the electoral objective had already been achieved. But here's where it gets controversial. More than a decade has passed, and Republicans are gearing up for another make-or-break Senate contest in North Carolina, this time escalating their previous tactics to an unprecedented level. Their chosen champion this cycle is Mike Whatley, a practicing attorney from North Carolina, who currently serves as the Republican National Committee's chairman. Whatley secured his leadership position by persuading Donald Trump that he would pursue a more aggressive strategy against voting access than his predecessor, Ronna McDaniel, had implemented. His leadership of the RNC has been characterized by an emphasis on initiatives designed to create additional barriers to voting, while simultaneously making it simpler for Republicans to contest election results they find unfavorable. This strategy encompasses a dramatic expansion of the party's courtroom battles. As Whatley prepares to transition away from his chairmanship role, the Republican Party has inserted itself into more than half of all voting and election-related legal proceedings currently moving through the court system. Out of 143 active cases involving voting and election matters across 42 states, Republican operatives are directly engaged in 73 of these legal challenges. While Donald Trump, who has already thrown his support behind Whatley's Senate ambitions, might serve as the philosophical figurehead of election denialism, Mike Whatley has emerged as one of its most influential tactical masterminds. Throughout the past year, perhaps no other individual has been as instrumental in attempting to restrict voting access for such a vast number of Americans in what should be free and fair democratic processes. And this is the part most people miss. North Carolina's Republican establishment is already laying the groundwork to boost Whatley's campaign prospects. The state's politically influenced Election Oversight Board is floating proposals that would potentially strip voting rights from hundreds of thousands of citizens, well in advance of the 2026 elections, while the Republican-dominated state legislature is weighing another sweeping anti-voting measure that could dramatically increase those numbers. Unlike the situation in 2014, today's Republicans possess an expanded arsenal of mechanisms to execute their plans for undermining democratic elections in North Carolina and across the nation. Attorney General Pam Bondi has already transformed the Department of Justice into what essentially functions as a taxpayer-funded extension of Trump's political machine. The agency that once stood as America's premier defender of voting rights has now dove headfirst into voter suppression litigation, actively participating in 17 voting and election cases. Over the past 10 years, Republicans have discovered that their aggressive assault on voting rights carries virtually zero political consequences. The mainstream media treats Trump's attacks on democratic institutions with what can only be described as disgraceful neutrality, sometimes bordering on outright admiration. Meanwhile, Democrats who attempt to defend their legitimate political interests face an entirely different and much harsher standard of scrutiny. House Republicans are banking on this double standard to launch an unprecedented wave of mid-cycle redistricting designed to further manipulate already skewed electoral maps in their favor. While current attention focuses primarily on Texas, where Governor Greg Abbott and the Republican-controlled state legislature are attempting to carve out an additional 5 congressional seats, national Republican leadership intends for this latest power grab to extend far beyond Texas borders if their plans succeed. It should surprise no one that these coordinated efforts are unfolding during one of the most dangerous periods in American democratic history. Donald Trump remains a deeply unpopular authoritarian figure who demonstrates willingness to employ any tactic necessary to avoid congressional oversight and accountability. He finds himself embroiled in scandal and desperately seeking to regain control over the political conversation. His attempts to redirect public attention are proving increasingly ineffective. Given these circumstances, Republicans will undoubtedly intensify their attacks on electoral integrity, while Trump continues promoting baseless conspiracy theories. However, there is encouraging news. Democrats are beginning to mount a counteroffensive. As we've learned through bitter experience, Republicans create their own rules, while hoping nobody will challenge their authority. Consequently, those of us committed to preserving democracy can no longer afford the luxury of adhering to traditional political norms and genteel conduct. The moment has arrived for decisive, forceful action. Our first priority must be identifying Republican election deniers and vote suppressors for exactly what they represent: threats to democratic participation and electoral integrity. We must abandon respectful titles and courteous diplomatic language. If they choose to manipulate democracy against the voters' interests, they have earned nothing but our complete disdain and opposition. Second, Democratic-controlled states must prioritize the enactment of pro-voting legislation during this critical year. Every single state possesses the capability to make its electoral laws more accessible to voters. Equally crucial, states must leverage their constitutional legislative authority to create voting procedures that can withstand Trump's interference attempts. There is absolutely no time for hesitation. States must demonstrate courage and determination in protecting their citizens' voting rights. Third, financial contributors and philanthropic organizations must dramatically increase their support for pro-democracy institutions, especially those organizations actively fighting for free and fair elections in courtrooms across America. The current resource disparity between groups working to subvert elections and those fighting to protect democratic processes has reached unsustainable levels. This is the moment for leadership, through substantial funding commitments to both non-partisan and partisan organizations defending democracy through legal channels. Finally, states where Democrats control both the governorship and legislature should immediately restart their redistricting processes to examine the possibility of reducing or completely eliminating Republican-leaning congressional districts within their borders. While legal and political obstacles will certainly emerge in various locations, now is the time for creative and strategic thinking about overcoming these challenges. Republicans understand only the language of raw political power. They will halt their escalating attacks on electoral systems only when forced to pay a substantial price for these actions. The time has come to abandon restraint and fight with equal determination. What do you think? Are Democrats finally ready to match Republican tactics? Or will they continue playing by rules that the other side abandoned long ago? Should pro-democracy forces adopt more aggressive strategies, even if it means abandoning traditional political civility? Share your thoughts. This conversation is too important for silence.